John Mcwhorter. Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you, Glenn?
I am good. I'm Glenn Loury, the Glenn Show at bloggingheads.tv. I'm with my conversation partner, John Mcwhorter. I teach at Brown. He teaches at Columbia. We're the Black Guys at bloggingheads.tv. That's our patented introduction. We are in the Glenn Show 2.0 era. And that's an era where we have a Patreon account and we encourage people to support us if they feel so inclined. That's patreon.com/Glenn Show, 2 N's, 1 word. And John and I are actually committing ourselves to doing a bi-weekly, is that what you call it? Bi-weekly, every other week thing, where on Mondays we'll put up new content, and content at the Glenn Show will be available to subscribers at Patreon as soon as this goes up on Monday, and a few days later to everybody else. And finally, I should say the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs, my employer at Brown University, along with the Economics Department, gives some institutional support to the Glenn Show. John, how you doing?
I'm pretty good, Glenn. I am looking forward to the end of this semester because of the technological.
For anyone who, I think they've pretty much covered it, but as you can see, Glenn here teaches economics at Brown University, and John Mcwhorter teaches, I believe, linguistics. And I forget at which Ivy League he's at, but one of them, I'm sure he'll say.
People want to pay for it. I'm just straight down the road kind of libertarian on that kind of thing. People, I think, prostitution laws are probably, anyway, we could go off into law. I think people should be able to transact freely when there's gains from trade if nobody else is hurt by it. And that's what people are willing to pay them. So it's more of a commentary on the market than it is on them that they're willing to beat, that there are people willing to pay them. That should occasion us to look at the institutions that have the values that lead to that outcome.
Yeah.
I think. But people are going to say we're jealous, John. Isn't that one of our themes? The Black Guys here at bloggingheads.tv, the contrarian Black guys who are critics of the people with 3 names who didn't like you can name them, but you know who they are. We're jealous of their success. They got book awards and Pulitzer Prizes and stuff like that. We don't have one of those. McCarthy, where's your McCarthy? John, where's your McCarthy?
That could never happen to me. No, that's a hater is going to hate kind of thing. I can see how we would look like we're jealous. I completely get it. But
for the record, they really do look like they're jealous. Like all of that complaining about how much money some of these speakers who are speaking on anti-racism issues are making. So I understand what they're trying to say is that the fact that they're even able to make that much money is a problem for speaking on these issues because they don't agree with them. But really, their agreement is neither here or there. This video was put out like 3 weeks ago. Their audience is growing exponentially, mostly because they're spending their time criticizing people like Ibram X. Kendi and Robin DiAngelo. So I don't really understand this whole, again, this is something I tweeted about incorrectly, but like, it is true that in a lot of their videos, there's this, victimization that they express that, that they are not the ones getting the recognition. They're not the ones getting the awards. They're not the ones making the big bucks. It's like, but you actually are, like you started the Patreon because there were people, as Glenn mentioned in one of his earlier videos, there are a ton of people who were asking about paying to support their work. And their videos are getting a lot of views and they're putting out weekly content. I'm sure their audience is just going to continue to grow. So I don't really understand what the problem is. But anyway, let's continue.
But I can definitely say, anybody who says that about me, for one thing, doesn't know me. I don't want to travel that much. I don't want to hang out that much. I want my
Can I just embarrass you for a minute by saying that I could write the notice of the MacArthur Award to John Mcwhorter in my sleep. It would not require very much effort at all. You had a very impactful career. You're still relatively young. I know you don't want to hear this, but it's ridiculous that we would a priori rule out the possibility that you could win one of those grants. Okay.
I also think that that's that was weird that he said that. Why does he think that it would never happen to him and that he would never get it? It's just all within his own mind, that he's thinking that. Maybe he has some kind of insider information about the committee or something, but it didn't really sound like it. It just sounded like he was preemptively victimizing himself.
You saw Bill Cosby trying to do it, but I think his transgression was
Bill Cosby was way over the top. He's a criminal.
Conclusive. But for example, Aziz Ansari, who is
that's an interesting case.
And he had a TV role on Parks and Recreation, and then he had this wonderful kind of dramedy on HBO or Netflix, I think it was, Master of None. Great little sitcom that really tried to make a statement.
So
we haven't seen that because he had a Me Too where somebody who he had a date with in the past reported him for having been a little
it was like obnoxious sex or
no, not sex, but he was just a little too pushy, indicating that he wanted sex and didn't seem like he completely.
Anyway, let's not parse the Me Too stuff.
Anyway, the point being, can he come back? And I'm sure.
I mean, you don't want to parse the Me Too stuff, but the devil's in the details with those things.
Not right.
I think his sitcom will come back, and maybe they're even starting to do it now. But it took some years.
So I'm thinking like a game theorist thinks. I mean, I'm thinking that it's secondary sanction that's the key. So secondary sanction is punishing the people who do not punish the person. Okay? The regime is a regime of punishment, so you don't trade with that person, you don't give them a job, you don't give them a chance. And the only way you can hold that together is that behind it is the message that if you deviate and you're the one who does trade with him, we're going to punish you too.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
The fact that his stigma carries over to those.
Yeah, so all of the things that he's saying could be applied to convicted felons as well. Not sure whether he's realizing that in this moment, but, people have been talking about this issue of, the permanent scarlet letter and how that follows you in the context of convicted felons for a long time. And, so it's very interesting to me that all of a sudden this is a point of contention or a topic that needs to be discussed because of this idea of cancel culture among celebrities. It's so weird because these guys are always talking about, celebrity culture and the problems with it, but they are fully engaged with it. Especially, I mean, this is such a good example because, for instance, on my show, I'm going to be having someone eventually who was convicted of a felony who's going to talk about, what kind of impact that's had on his life going forward. For the last, over a decade now, almost a decade and a half. And I think that that's what's important, right? Is that people put in these situations, maybe they make a mistake early on in life. They, go to prison, they pay for their mistake or not, in the case of my friend. And ultimately, that's done. It's over. But then their entire life is basically trying to figure out how to navigate a world where they've now lost a bunch of their rights. They can't vote. They have to disclose on every job application they apply to that they've been convicted of a felony. And if they don't disclose that, then they could be in more trouble for that. So it really limits their opportunities because, nobody has to hire them. And why do people not hire convicted felons? Because they're concerned, right? They're concerned about what that person did in the past and what that shows about their character. They're concerned about what it would mean if other people found out that they were hiring convicted felons. So it's the exact same thing, but it's actually something that's material and affecting people who are not super wealthy and who are going to be just fine, as they're kind of talking about right now. Like Aziz Ansari is going to be fine. His life is not, over because of what he did or because somebody reported it. So, I don't know. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Those who are prepared to trade with him is really critical to many. And I think rehabilitation is going to be facilitated by weakening that secondary bond, by having there be people willing to come out and take the risk that they seem to be doing business with the person, and know that their reputations themselves will not be too much besmirched by that.
Right. That will be part of what I sense even now as what will be a national pushback of sorts against the excesses of wokeness. And I'm not talking about Me Too specifically, but yeah, there's going to have to be some Spartacus moments where certain people stand up and just say, you can call me what you want to, but I am going to take a stand here and say, rehabilitate this person, accept this person, make this statement. And I think it'll get to the point where we get back to the relative sense that reigned in about 1997 as opposed to now. But yeah, there's going to need to be that. And I sense that people are beginning to understand that you can push back against this sort of thing and stay alive. And I actually, in the book that I am just now possibly going to get out much sooner than I thought. You heard it here first. I don't know anything yet, but my anti-woke book, I end it with a kind of list of entities.
Anti-woke book. That's how he describes it. Just want to let that sit there.
And people who have stood up to this kind of stuff in 2020 and lived to tell about it. Because I think that we need to make people realize that somebody calling you a racist on Twitter will not end your life. And it will be ever less dangerous the more people realize that Twitter is not the world and you can keep going. So yeah.
Anyone who would believe that in the first place, I mean, I don't know, like that's a problem in and of itself. Hang on, let me get back to where we were. Sorry.
And the only way so secondary sanction is punishing the people who.
To be some Spartacus moments where certain push back against this sort of thing and stay alive. And I actually, in the book that I am just, Twitter will not end your life. And it will be ever less dangerous the more people realize that Twitter is not the world and you can keep going. So yeah, this is something that we're going to see in 2021. I suspect, especially very quickly, because Trump is out. And there's often been a standing idea that the excesses of wokeness are necessary because Trumpism and, race nationalism is on the march. Well, an anti-racist, crazy is on the march. That's not going to be true anymore. And so you're not going to have Trump as an excuse for making people cry for not being woke enough. Now, of course, people will find other excuses, but Trump was iconic in that way. So 2021 is going to be interesting.
Why does it have to be finding excuses? Why is that the only option? Is that if you are interested in doing something about racists, you have to grab a telescope and be searching far and wide and looking for excuses to be promoting an idea of anti-racism in a society and a country that has been historically racist. I just don't understand that. I don't understand the perception. I don't understand the perspective. I would love to talk directly to these guys and figure out and question them because, they put out these videos and it's just them kind of like making these statements. And I rarely hear any kind of real pushback, in the moment. It's part of it is the way that they kind of communicate, even when they're communicating with people who disagree with them. It's more in like a debate style. I really would like to see more of a conversation style between them and someone who disagrees with them. And I'd be happy to be the person to do it because it's very concerning how dismissive they are of anti-racist figures and the culture that's developing around anti-racism. Obviously, they've come to a conclusion about it. In John Mcwhorter's case, when I was Googling him 20 years ago, he wrote an article that was, something like, of the same, let me actually see if I can find it real quick. Hang on. Because it's worthwhile. Hang on 1 second. Yeah, he wrote an article in 2001, so about 20 years ago. What's holding blacks back? It's black attitudes, not white racism. That's to blame. So this has been his thing for some time now. That is, what he believes. He's believed it for multiple decades. So that's just what he's been promoting.
we interrupted was, and I'll come to Trump. I was going to ask you whether you'd allow me to interview you here at the Glenn Show about the book.
The book. As soon as
about your book.
As soon as I know when it's coming out.
No, I mean, of course, it appropriately timed.
Oh, yeah.
I want to read the book, and then I want us to have a back and forth about it, because I think that could be a very enlightening for me in any case conversation. Maybe for you,
we're doing it,
and maybe even for others who might be interested in hearing us do that.
And for some people, because all of us have limited time, I shouldn't say this, but that will substitute for them reading the book. I'm quite aware of that. So yes, we definitely.
Oh no, you want the timing to be right. I mean, I don't want to subvert in any way the process that you're publisher will be going through.
That book is going to happen one way or the other.
But I'm interested also in your thing about the wokeness and Trump and whatnot. I think you're wrong, actually. I think I agree with you that Trump did draw that ire and symbolize that thing, but I don't think he was a particularly impactful force in terms of fomenting or promoting anything that was objective, that was actually real in terms of anti-blackness.
Wow. I don't even know what to say about that. What do you guys think? Do you agree? Do you think that Trump did not foment any anti-blackness? Do you think that his explicit and transparent silence on all of the racial tensions that occurred, except for when he was criticizing Black Lives Matter protesters, the small minority of them who were committing acts of violence or looting, had no impact? Because me personally, I definitely don't believe that. What about all of the politicians who he belittled, specifically regarding their intelligence, their lack of intelligence, who were all happened to be, black? All the tokenizing he did of black people during his administration. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't believe that those things are very impactful, but I completely disagree.
Going. So yeah, this is something that we're going to see in 2021. I suspect, especially on the march.
I was going to ask you whether you'd allow me to interview here at the Glenn Show about the case. Conversation maybe for you. It'd be right. I mean, I don't want to subvert in any way. I agree with you that Trump did draw that ire and symbolize that thing, but I don't think he was a particularly impactful force in terms of fomenting or promoting anything that was objective, that was actually real in terms of anti-blackness.
What about all the MAGAs who kind of viewed it as anti-blackness, or at least pro-white, which really I don't really know what the difference between pro-white and anti-black is, but I mean, that was obviously there. Some people interpreted MAGA to mean that. Obviously a significant portion if you go back and watch video. What about all his coded language? You know who I'm talking about, this and that. A lot of it was with immigrants, but as soon as Black Lives Matter became a target, he took aim, So, I don't know.
People perhaps would disagree with that, but I don't. I mean, it was all about, he called places shithole countries, and he thought that Obama was not a citizen.
Well, no, he knew Obama was a citizen. He was just using that to inflame people's already latent racism to make sure that he ended up getting more support. So whether you think that actually has a material effect or not, that's, I guess, a different question. But I think transparently he was trying to activate racism in order to achieve a goal.
Unraveling of wokeness. That's and whether or not unencumbered by Trump, the discourse will indeed be freer Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying
Without
is
the necessity to look over your shoulder, or why I criticize Black Lives Matter, they're going to think I'm supporting Trump, or I'm saying the same thing that Trump is saying.
I would more cynically say that will no longer stand in as a justification for the often self-gratifying, often theatrical excesses of wokeness. You could always say,
but it was never an addict.
What does that mean? What does that mean? What are the theatrics? What are the excesses of wokeness? Like, I have no idea what that means. Like, it has to be explained, because this is something, this came out 3 weeks ago. I've watched some other videos with Mcwhorter in it since, and he's kind of said this multiple times in multiple videos. What theatrics is he talking about? I feel like he's always trying to caricature anti-racist movements. He's always trying to characterize, make it a caricature of what it actually is. But he never actually goes into specifics. So it's very difficult to say anything contrary to it. Maybe he'll get into the details further on. Let's keep watching.
Adequate justification. That was, I guess, my point. It was never an adequate justification.
There's that. I mean, Glenn, though, wouldn't you say, what a lot of people say is that the number of explicitly racist groups has gone up since Trump was elected. And many people say that's because
the Southern Poverty Law Center. I'm sure that's true. Do I think that Trump has presided over a restitution or a resurrection of anti-blackness? No, I don't think that.
And what would you say to somebody who said that?
I don't see that. I don't see that. In fact, I see just the opposite. I see the rise of Black Lives Matter. I see the election of Barack Obama. I see the coronation of Michelle Obama. I see LeBron James. I see Oprah Winfrey. No, I see the National Book Award. I see the New York Times. Are you kidding me? An era of the rise of anti-black racism. I see a college campus. No, people have their careers canceled for saying the wrong thing about blackface in this country. As Shelby Steele
nobody's having their career canceled by saying the wrong thing about blackface.
Said right here, not long ago, there's not enough racism. There's an insufficient amount of injustice. People have to make up affronts. They invent it, So systemic racism, anti-black racism, they are on the hunt. It's the theory now is no one had to actually do an anti-black thing. The system is anti-black, which invites an interrogation of what the cause of the various disparities are that we see in the world.
Okay, but I mean, that's not new, right? Like, it's not a new idea that systems inherently have racism like within the way that they operate. Like, it's not a new idea. It's just become a more popularized idea with more people outside of the black community.
Whereas the system arguing people actually never have to tell you. All they have to do is cite the disparity. Kids have lower test scores. That must be a failure of the system. It's all a bluff, John, because a careful interrogation of all these areas will inevitably leave one with a substantial amount of weight resting on the extent to which people themselves are managing their lives, raising their families, starting their businesses, and doing the things that are required to be effective in this society. Jails teeming with black people is an indication of the failure of the system? No. Perhaps the system should be reconfigured in light of the fact that the jails are full. Perhaps you want less penalties. Perhaps you want more programs, this, that, or the other. But the first order inference from the fact that I see crime and punishment at an outsized level in a certain community is that there are failures in the developmental processes of that community that leaves criminals preying on people. That's what I think. When I see a school gap, you look at the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which measures 4th, 8th, and 12th grade kids' reading and math proficiency. And the fraction of black kids who are at below basic proficiency in their performance on these exams is stunning and vastly higher than the fraction of white kids. It's
interesting that how he's interpreting that data. I am a teacher. I've been a public school educator for the last 15 years. So I've looked at a lot of data. I've talked to a lot of teachers from all across the nation. I've worked with the mentoring program, done all kinds of work. And I feel like anyone who's actually doing the work would never conclude what he just said. I mean, it's 100% absolutely true that I have encountered anyway personally with the over 1,000 students who I've taught through my career, that many Black students are in an environment at home or within their local community that doesn't really encourage them to make good choices, or it doesn't really put them in a position where it's easy for them to make the choices that we traditionally think of lead to success. But the question is, how did those environments get created in the first place? And when you backtrack that, you're going to see that racism played a role. And maybe that's what bothers people. Is like, they don't want to look back and see the actual causal relationship there. Or maybe they're like, okay, well, enough time has passed. People should just get over it. But obviously, there's an issue there, right? Because that's not what has happened. Time has not healed this wound. And given the fact that, a toxic racial environment was perpetuated in America for several generations, I wonder why people are so quick to say that we should be over it when, it was propagated for so long. That's kind of my perspective on it. But I do actually agree that a lot of the communities in which some of the students who were really struggling with, their behaviors or their mindsets or making good choices, or were living in a survivalist mentality, that's definitely a thing that exists. But it's all about, what we should do about that. And of course, there are tons of organizations and individuals who are working within their local communities to do something about it, as am I. But, what people will report and what I'm going to report right now is that those efforts, when you start engaging in them, you start realizing that the problem is so much bigger than anything that you could possibly handle. And that's the point. And whether you want to think about the problem as being about, white racism, or whether you want to think about it as being systemic or institutionalized racism or whatever, I really feel like we need to ask people on the ground more who are actually doing the work about what they think, because what you'll find is that what they think is that the problem is so massive that it needs a massive solution, like with a lot of different parts. And that's what we're lacking. And that's what the anti-racist movement is partially trying to build, is a cooperative that can actually deal with all of these issues at once.
Just let me finish this, and I will, to say that that's just systemic racism.
Mm-hmm.
What it is Black kids are not being developed to their full human potential. Now
How are those two things in conflict? How is systemic racism and Black kids are not being developed to their full human potential? How are those disparate ideas? They're directly related.
To begin to have a conversation about why, but the home life is going to have a lot to do with that. Parenting is going to have a lot to do with that.
Agree. 100% agree.
Values. What they hold up as an ideal for a good way of life. People are making choices. Take those choices away from them. You reduce them to shits.
See, this is the crux of the issue. Take those choices away from them. So if we're talking about systemic racism, then we're basically like removing the idea that the individual person might actually have responsibility for what happens to them. That is not how it works. It's not what anyone is promoting. It's not what anyone believes. The only time I ever hear this is from conservatives. I never hear this anywhere else. So it's unbelievable. It's like creating your own boogeyman and then trying to slay it.
On a board, they're making choices. And when you have such disparities as profoundly large and consistent as what I'm talking about right here, there are a lot of Black people making the wrong choices.
And not because racism is making them do it, you're saying?
Well,
because that's what.
Yes, I am saying that. And to imagine that anyone would say that racism is making them make the wrong choices. I mean, imagine the rabbit hole you just went down of self-loathing.
But it's not about self-loathing, It's the same. Remove racism. Think about it in a different situation. Let's say that you are in some other kind of bad situation. I wasn't ready with the hypothetical here, but like you're in a bad situation, right? Naturally, regardless of the nature of that situation, your choices are going to be more narrow than someone who is in a better situation. That's what being in a bad situation does. It narrows your options. It narrows your opportunities. It narrows the choices that you can make. I don't know what he's thinking, what either one of them are thinking when they say blame it on racism, but it's not as unreasonable as they were just kind of suggesting. One thing that I see all the time with students, because I talk to my students, I investigate, their mindsets and what they're thinking. I teach a lot of mindset stuff. So that's why I know for sure, because I've seen tons of patterns expressing this, that there is a huge problem with mindset, that people can get stuck in a kind of thinking pattern where they believe that nothing they can do is going to make a difference or nothing's going to work, even if they work really hard, even if they do the same as other students who succeed, they're not going to be able to get through. Or more often, I would say people who believe that they just don't have the ability to succeed because either that's something they've been told in the past by someone who is supposed to be encouraging them. I see that most often is, if you drill down with people's experiences and you try to investigate and find out why their mindset is the way it is, they often report some kind of pivotal moment. Normally it's just one specific moment where either a teacher told them that they were not worthwhile or that they were never going to be good at something, or that they weren't good at something and they should focus on something else, or a parent. Those are, the vast majority of kind of negative experiences that shape people's mindsets that I hear about. So there definitely is something to all of that, but it's just, I just find it strange that it's an either or, right? Humans make their choices, but we make choices based on the environment in which we're situated and the circumstances that surround us. We don't make our choices in a vacuum. It's not like there's a red pill and a blue pill and all we have to do is choose the right one. I think that's an extremely simplistic way to think about making choices, and to imagine that racism doesn't touch any of the choices that especially young African American men and boys and girls make. I'm not sure how you could possibly arrive at that framework.
Racism is making me do the wrong choice. In other words, there is no me. There's no me here. All there is the forces that are acting on me, making me do the wrong choice. You can't stand up. You can't.
It's not all there is, but I mean, the point is that you do have to stand up to those forces. Like, that is a necessity in order to actually achieve success. And while that may not be a big deal to you or to Mr. Mcwhorter, it is a big deal to a lot of people who are not in the same kind of environment as you, or who are dealing with different circumstances than you. And to just dismiss those people and their circumstances and the externalities that they do have to deal with, it's just so disappointing. It's disappointing to just whittle it down to you just made the wrong choices and that's it.
Can't stand up straight because racism is, come on, that's despicable. That's disgusting.
Now the sociologist is now very angry at you because they say, how dare you misunderstand that the problem is that black people don't have any agency. I remember people throwing that term at me when I wrote Losing the Race and having to learn what they meant. You're ignoring.
Okay, I've never heard anyone say that either. I talk to sociologists all the time. I watch their videos. Never heard any sociologist say that black people lack agency.
I have read all three of those people. Yes, and that's complicated. But you're not required to really command that kind of thinking, except on a superficial level. I get the feeling to be, and this is, we have to be careful because, for example, this is not me knocking Mitch Duneier, who is an excellent sociologist. But
that's
the way we are encouraged to think about sociology is as if it's all very easy. We know that math and astrophysics are hard, but when it comes to thinking about society, we're supposed to settle for platitudes.
Okay, well, sociology heavily relies on math. So I don't really know what to say about that.
And call
I think you're selling sociology short. I don't think that's how they think about themselves.
Oh, they don't think about themselves.
Nor is it how sociology actually exists.
I think they think society is complicated in that there are processes and structures and whatnot that you can. I mean, I guess we should probably be concrete and talk about particular examples. But I mean, here's some of the sociologists that I have learned from: Peter Berger's The Social Construction of Reality, Berger and Luckman. Irving Goffman, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, Stigma. This is Irving Goffman. Robert Merton, self-confirming prophecies. And
never actually read him.
Things of this kind. Orlando Patterson would be a person I think would be on my list. I mean, he definitely.
Mm-hmm. But yet, Glenn, the problem is, you're talking about all of these excellent people. These are people I was introduced to reading sociology. Despite what I said about sociology and the GREs, and I'm sorry, but that's just going to have to stand because it was a fact. I'm talking less about academic sociology than the way we are encouraged to think about sociology and what academics let pass as sociology. So, for example, Ibram Kendi going all around the country preaching to people that
is he a professor of sociology?
Racism.
Is he a professor of sociology at
Boston University? He's one of the first major.
I thought it was Black Studies. African
American Studies. But he's saying that thing. That is a sociological insight, and it's junk. And yet, all of these academics are standing.
It's not his insights are not sociological. They're historical. He's a historian.
They're in their suits, listening to him say that to their undergraduates in particular, and no one calls him on it, and therefore he genuinely doesn't know that what he's saying is nonsense and underthought. Nobody even tells him. And so that's what I mean. We allow that. Nobody could get up and purvey junk astrophysics or junk French grammar or junk literary analysis all over the country and be celebrated. That's only allowed when it's about societal insights. And I think that we need to get beyond that. Imagine if we were like France, where to be a public sociologist of any kind, you have to be as sharp as Lionel Trilling was. That's something that we miss here in the United States. It's an interesting phenomenon, and that's part of what I think frustrates you and me about who gets to say what out there in public.
It's just his subjective judgment that Kendi doesn't know what he's talking about. That's all that he's relying on.
Disagree, John.
I think we are right in general stripes. We can be wrong about stuff. I mean, I certainly am, but I think that the general paradigm we're speaking against in a certain future will be proven to be bankrupt. I do think that we're moving towards that. Change happens slowly, which is something that the other side doesn't often seem to want to acknowledge. But the fact that it happens slowly doesn't mean that it doesn't happen at all. I got that from Leon Wiesel here, actually, something he wrote at some point. But
Oh, really?
Again, he's arguing with somebody who doesn't exist. There's no one who would argue against the idea that change happens slowly. There's no one who would argue against that. But because he's setting up anti-racist proponents as being people who would think that, he can then slash them down as saying it's crazy that they think change can't happen slowly. It's not that they think that change can't happen slowly. It's that they think that change needs to happen faster. That's the difference.
Good point. Yeah, change, just because change happens slowly doesn't mean that it doesn't happen at all. And so, yeah, and by the way, while we're on Professor Kendi, I want to slip something in here because he called me a racist. He called me a racist online.
You say that again? You were called a racist by Ibram X. Kendi?
Yeah, 3 names. He
probably thinks you should be flattered that he deigned to call you racist. In fact, he acknowledged that you exist, and then deigned to call you a racist.
Oh, he had deigned that I existed in his stamp from the beginning, which I didn't say anything about. And somebody asked him a question, and he said that I have racist ideas. Now, I said on Twitter that I was not going to entertain.
So notice how at first he said Kendi called him a racist, and then he said in response to a question, he said that Mcwhorter had racist ideas.
On Twitter saying that if anybody disagrees with him, get this, if anybody disagrees with him, it's not that they have a legitimate disagreement, it's that they couldn't find anything to disagree with genuinely in his ideas, and so they make something up to put out there that he said.
Well, given that Mcwhorter has done that multiple times in just this video clip, I don't think it's that outlandish.
And that therefore he takes it as a compliment when anybody criticizes him, because he genuinely believes that he could never be wrong. So if somebody has a problem.
He literally spends so much of his last book that he put out, How to Be an Anti-Racist, explaining how he was wrong and how being anti-racist is a continuous journey. And no one is consistently anti-racist or racist, that we're all constantly moving along a continuum and having different kinds of thoughts that would fall into different categories. So that definitely doesn't fit with saying that he can never be wrong. I also watched a lecture that he gave recently, or just like a conversation he had, I guess, really. And he specifically stated that there were some specific areas where he wanted people to actually challenge his perspective so that he could help it grow, but nobody actually does that because people don't want to engage with him on those particular issues. People want to just try to destroy him, basically, which obviously these two are interested in doing, since they've criticized him and used so many ad hominem attacks. Seems clear.
Problem with his stuff, Coleman writing his article about how to be an anti-racist, I suppose me too. We actually understand that his ideas are coherent, but we have to have something mean to say, because I guess we're not nice people. And so, as a result, we make up something that he said and we jump all over that. And so he takes it as a compliment that he's criticized. You know what?
What would be a specific example of that? Excuse me. I'm just trying to make sure I understand the argument.
In general,
what's an example of something that he says that you construe in such a way as to intentionally misstate it, whatever?
In general, he has this kind of dichotomous idea that either one is an anti-racist or a racist. You can't be just not terribly committed to the whole paradigm. If you're not terribly committed, you are still a racist.
Does he try to establish that? I didn't read the book.
Agree, by the way. Agree. That's unfortunately, it's not fair, but that is just how racism operates. Unfortunately, you can't be Switzerland in a country that has a historical legacy of racism. It doesn't work. You can pretend like you're not a part of it. People do that all the time. But the whole point of this anti-racism movement is to get people to realize that we can't solve the problem if that's what people are doing. So it's not about blaming people. It's not about putting blame on people. It's about making sure everyone understands the nature of the environment in which they're currently living. And that does describe it accurately.
Does he try to show you that that's true, that you have this dichotomy, or does he just assert it?
He asserts it and then maybe spends, a certain amount of time exploring it, but not in a way that either one of us would consider exploration.
Okay.
And frankly, it doesn't work. It's simplistic. He just puts it out there. And he's been called on that many times. Interesting is reading Khalif Asana, who did a piece on him in the New Yorker. And Khalif's heart is in the black left place, but even Khalifa got that this stuff was a little Manichaean. But this is the point. If Kendi really doesn't understand that the nature of ideas is such that if someone disagrees with you, it may be that they understand you completely and they still don't agree. If he doesn't get that, at best, he is extremely inexperienced in the nature of dealing with ideas and argument for somebody with a PhD.
Well, exactly. Obviously, he's not, because he has a PhD. So, again, the only point of making that comment is to attack Kendi and to make him seem like he is not intelligent or that he's not a good thinker. That's pretty much what all these comments are designed to do. As you can see, they did kind of draw out his framework about racism and anti-racism, but in terms of actually delving into it, there's nothing. There's no content there.
That's somebody with a doctorate? At worst, if he really does think that he's come up with something that is that sacrosanct, and that anybody who's criticizing him is just being a jerk, then
it has nothing to do with how sacrosanct his content is. It's about the people who are criticizing him, just like Mr. Mcwhorter here. It's about what they're saying, just like he is showing that he's not interested in engaging with the actual content. He is interested in belittling Kendi and making Kendi seem like he is not qualified, that he is not someone who should be talking about these things, and that his ideas are wrong.
I think that he's not the sharpest knife in the drawer. So, if
okay,
I'm a racist,
I got to make the case for even Max Kendi here.
Let me finish. One other thing, though.
Okay.
One other thing. A little nuance here. He said, I have racist ideas. So he might say, well, I didn't call him a racist. I said he had racist ideas. Well, then I'm going to nuance it. He has dumb ideas. And I've been holding off on saying that for about 6 months. But frankly, I don't think he is the brightest bulb on the Christmas tree.
And that's signifying now. You're signifying. It's like talking about somebody's mama. What I was going to say was Stamped from the Beginning was an award-winning book, and I don't know what did it win. Did it win a Pulitzer? It won something. National Book Award. No, wait a minute. That's his first big book, and it's a history of the stigmatization and exclusion of African Americans, graphically rendered in a way that had a big cachet. Mm-hmm. My wife LaJuan has a copy of that book, and I never read it. How to be an anti-racist has had huge success. And doesn't he have like a $10 or $20 million endowed research center at BU? I'm pretty sure that one of the tech companies dumped a whole bunch of money on him. I used to teach at BU. I still know a few people there, although it's been many years since I've been there. And he's this iconic figure. Now, you just called him a lightweight. You said he's dumb, John.
I don't find him brilliant. If you're going to call me a racist, I am going to say that, because I also get the feeling that many other people feel the same way, but they don't feel comfortable saying it out loud. I think he is a preacher walking around promulgating undercooked, simplistic ideas.
Is he a MacArthur Prize fellow?
And he's never called on it.
Undercooked, simplistic ideas. So Mcwhorter has these famous 4 planks that he believes Black America needs. And if we just focus on these 4 planks, then within a generation, racial inequality will be over. And these planks are that we should teach literacy and reading better, that we should end the war on drugs, that we should offer free contraception, reversible contraception to anyone, regardless of income, and that we should treat tradesmen as being just as American as people who go to college and get a 4-year degree. He thinks that if we do those 4 things, that racism will no longer be an issue in the United States. So for him to suggest that someone else has undercooked simplistic ideas, or that no one else has ever thought about teaching reading better, or ending the war on drugs, or contraception being available, or the, increasing the validity of trade as, a valid way of being an American in our society. Like, if that's not the definition of undercooked and simplistic in terms of how to deal with the social, psychological, and economic and legal consequences of a legacy of racism for generations, I don't know what is.
And you and I both know, as far as the MacArthur and the National Book Award, etc., that there's a massive bias among the people who give those awards towards assuaging their white guilt, or if they are a black person, participating in making white people feel guilty. And so, to be perfectly honest, I'm not saying that Stamped from the Beginning is a bad book, but the kinds of awards that he's getting cannot be taken as indicating that what I just said is not true. And frankly, Glenn, if you read How to Be an Anti-Racist, you would agree with me. It is a very simplistic book.
Yeah, I'm elected not to.
And I should make it clear, the only reason that I'm saying this is...
Just FYI. So the awards that he's talking about Kendi winning were not for How to Be an Anti-Racist. Number one, it was for Stamped from the Beginning, which neither one of them have read. I think they're about to admit that, because I think I did watch a clip of this. Let's keep going.
It's because he called me such a terrible thing in public. If that's the way it's going to be, I'm going to be honest too.
What I think, the reason I'm not engaged in this literature, and I suffer with you, John, I regret that you've been called a racist, and I can feel the emotion that you exude and your response, and I have solidarity with you. I'm in solidarity with you.
Wow, so you can feel solidarity and empathy for John, having not even been called a racist, but actually being said that some of his ideas were racist. So you feel empathy and, kinship with that. But black people who are experiencing racism, or who want to do something about the problem of racism, and who are promoting anti-racism as a remedy, you feel no kinship there. You feel no empathy there. You simply feel anger and disgust. So that's interesting.
I do not find him to be engaging in feats of any kind of cleverness. I think it's vastly oversimplified, his ideas. They don't strike me as academic. It surprises me that he has a PhD. And I think that he's never called on it. And it is a little bit disturbing, because people are looking to him as some kind of guru. And he's an example of what I mean, in that he is having these sociological insights distributed out there that are not based on what an academic would think of as scholarly rigor, and which even non-academics can see through, but are told that they're missing something or are moral perverts if they question. I don't think that's good for society. I don't care how much money he makes. I don't think that speaks well for our general intellectual and moral culture. That doesn't bother you at all?
Why can't we let 1,000 flowers bloom, and instead of us spending our time running down Ibram X. Kendi, whose books I haven't read, and am unlikely to do so, we might just write our own books.
Because he is,
which is what you're doing.
He's the latest kudzu.
And illustrate through our labor what we think the right, what we think
Ultimately, that is what I will be doing. But I decided I was going to take the gloves off for those 10 minutes, and I did. There are times when you're just supposed to roll with punches like that, but I'm getting a little tired of rolling with punches like that. And so, I decided to speak my truth on that. And if you've read Kendi's work, I'm quite sure that you would feel the same way. Not that he's dumb, not that he's stupid, not that he's an empty suit. Stamped from the Beginning was not written by an empty suit.
Okay, he's modifying his position, everybody.
But I do think that his basic ideas that are getting around are not sound thinking. And I think that he should be called on it. To not call him on it is to be racist. I watched him in a public forum say, so like that thing that only white people can write books about racism. Glenn, do you know that thing? I cannot identify that thing since roughly, the 17th century. There's never been a time when.
Like I say, man, I'm not paying any attention to this stuff because I think it's racism. All false.
He said that, and the audience goes, "Oh yeah, that's right." That's not true at all. A public intellectual.
They're acting out a ritualistic thing, man. It's a coon show. It's a minstrel show.
It's church is what it is. And so that is what I am calling out here, that we are not requiring enough.
It's the modern day equivalent of Amos and Andy. And it is so.
Listen, if that happened, then I'm on their side. But this reaction, it's childish. It's really juvenile. And it's so disappointing because these guys are brilliant. Obviously, they're really intelligent. Like, why are they spending their time doing this? If you really believe that the ideas are so inherently flawed, then lay out the case. Lay out the case. You're not doing that right now. You're literally just talking about how stupid people are, how they don't deserve the accolades that they've gotten, how they're just creating an environment to pat each other on the back. But it's just fluff. It's the same kind of fluff that you're accusing him of pursuing, is what you're putting out here in this video.
Insulting to Black people, to not take us sufficiently seriously, and to,
how do they not hear the hypocrisy of what they're saying? They're literally spending like an hour-long video criticizing a Black PhD intellectual who has gained popularity by calling him dumb and saying that his ideas lack rigor. And now you're saying that really what he is doing is he is delegitimizing other Black academics.
You know what I don't get is there is a conception of this public intellectual we're talking about where that person never writes refereed articles in journals, or maybe only does it once or twice, where that person never writes an academic book as opposed to a pop book, where that person never goes to a conference with a new idea and stands there having to defend it against real questions. I thought that's what being an academic was. Then you choose the public intellectual thing, which frankly in many ways is easier, but you do it on the basis of, yes, having been forged by what I just said. But there's this new idea or alternate idea, because it's not new. What a public intellectual was in the early 20th century is different than what it is now. But there's this idea now that you were a doctor, whatever, and you don't do what I just said. And I think that the defense is...
Except for he definitely 100% has done what he just said. FYI.
Is if they've chosen to have more of an effect on the world. They've chosen to do something that is different from what I just said about going to a conference and really having to fight. And they would say that the two things are equal, and that's a whole argument. But I'm not sure I get it. If how are you an academic if you don't write academic articles and academic books and regular?
Okay, that's enough of that. Welp. These videos, they frustrate me to no end, you guys, because, as some of you may know, I created the Contraband Wagon to change the conversation on race. And this is what we're up against. We're up against people who are also trying to change the conversation, but really with the obvious intention of making an enemy of anti-racist action and individuals who support those actions. So, I mean, I'm not sure what the utility of what they're doing is. There's obviously some kind of fear that's involved of what path we're going to go down if we follow the path of anti-racism. But then there's this whole just obvious antagonism directed toward the major figures. And a lot of it seems to stem from envy. or the fact that we're in a new type of environment where any individual who has something to say can promote themselves and can promote their ideas. And if those ideas take off, then that can be really lucrative and bolster someone's public profile very quickly. And that's really what happened to Ibram X. Kendi, but it's because he wrote some significant books. The first one, which is heavily cited and extremely historically anyway, academic, citing the United States Historical Archives a billion times, is Stamped from the Beginning. I highly encourage everyone to read it. The subtitle is A Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. It's a great book. It's a very difficult read. I don't think it's 100% perfect, but there's nothing like it out there. And it has some great historical information in it. It really shows how things kind of got started and why they've been perpetuated through the generations. So I definitely encourage anyone who's up for reading a practical historical text to engage in that. And then his second one, How to Be an Anti-Racist, that one is more about his personal journey of having been inculcated into racist ideology himself and working his way out of that as he learned more about racism and racist ideas and their origin, and as he studied stuff, realizing how he himself was impacted and how we're all impacted, and how we all have to take a second to step back at this time and think about, how we can actually be advocates for anti-racism rather than allowing these externalities to work their, mojo on us and just get us thinking whatever's beneficial for people in power. And that's really what's been happening. And we want to do something different. We want to move in a different direction. And, unlike what they're kind of implying here, the goal of anti-racism is to make it so that we don't have to be doing this, don't have to be engaging in this generations-long battle and struggle for dignity, for justice. We don't want to be doing this. And to suggest otherwise, I think, is to suggest that you are living in an alternate reality. Nobody wants to be dealing with racism. Nobody wants to be dealing with oppression. You're born into it. You're born black. So, that's kind of the deal here. I may watch more of their stuff in the future because they are prominent voices and they need some pushback. I actually hope to get them on the show so I can talk with them directly, because they really need to talk to somebody outside of their elite circle of people. So that's kind of my take on it. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. I really appreciate it.